Welcome to another cross-training tutorial. In this tutorial, I'm going to cover how to create the engineering paper grid using a piece of software called Adobe InDesign. So the very first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to open a new document. So what I've done here is I've just basically opened InDesign. This is InDesign version 6, it's a little bit older. And this little kind of pop-up window opens. If you don't want to create a new document using this, so I'll just hit exit. I can go this way, go to File, and go to New, and choose Document. And you'll have this new document window that opens. I'm going to leave everything in here at default for now, because I can always go in later and change it. So from here I'll just click OK. And you should see something somewhat similar to this that opens. So when we create things in InDesign, we typically create a template and then we apply that template to actual pages, which is the lower half of this little panel area over here. So I'm just going to drag it upwards so that it's kind of a 50-50 split. So up here at the top, the very first thing I need to do is create a new template or a new master page spread. So in InDesign, it calls two pages that are stuck together like this a spread. And basically the left half is basically the left page of a book if you had a book open. And the right side is the right side of the page if you had a book open. So we call this a spread. So I'm going to create a new master page spread. So I'll just right click here somewhere in the gray space and choose New Master. This new master window will open, and I'm going to give it the prefix of G, which stands for grid, and for the name I'm just going to call it grid. And then down here where it says based on master, I'm going to leave this as none, but this area allows you to apply master pages to master pages to master pages. It can get pretty elaborate, but for this we're going to keep it very simple. All we're interested in is just making an engineering paper grid, so we'll leave this as none. Number of pages we'll leave at 2, paper size we'll leave at letter, and down here we'll leave all of this at default, and we'll click OK. So now we see up here, we see a master and we see a grid. And if we look over here in our kind of like our canvas area, we see a left side and we see a right side, and we have this grid selected. So one of the things that we need to do now really quickly is we need to set our margins. Notice that when we created things, it was using kind of like a strange unit, and our engineering paper is kind of like in its own set of units. So let's try to get these units to kind of match up with our engineering paper units. So to do that, I'm going to go up here to Edit and to Preferences and go to Units and Increments. The Units and Increments window should open, and over here it says Origin. So at the top where it says Origin, it should say Spread because we want to do both pages. And notice here it says Horizontal Picas. So we probably want to pick something that comes very close to engineering paper. So I'm going to click this drop down and I'm going to choose inches decimal. And for vertical, I'll do the exact same thing and choose inches decimal. And then everything else down here, I'm going to leave this at default and click OK. Now notice our ruler up here at the top has changed to increments that are basically each inch has like 10 tick marks in between. So that's kind of like how our engineering paper is. So we can see that one side, this half is 8.5, and the total height of the paper is 11 inches. So we're going to be mostly concerned with this right half over here, and you're probably wondering, well, you know, that engineering grid is actually on the back side of the right side of the paper. So imagine that over here in the center we have those 3 holes. So what we're actually going to do is kind of do the opposite. We're going to make the grid on this side. And then when we bring it into another piece of software, we'll be able to set the transparency and push the grid back so it doesn't overtake our paper. So the next thing we need to do is set our margins. So we have this pink line going across the top and 2 purple lines on each side and another pink line down here at the bottom. Those are basically our margins. And what we're going to do is make these margins match our engineering paper and use these as guides. So when we actually go to export this, these margins will not export. These lines are kind of invisible lines. They're just more for us to know where the edge of the paper is, or if we want to use this as guides. So let's go ahead and set the margins. And to do that, we're going to go to Layout, and we're going to go to Margins and Columns. So if you want to match engineering paper exactly, I found that the top needs to be set to 0.75. The bottom needs to be set to 0.25. The inside, that's basically in here, needs to be set to 1 inch. And the outside we leave at 0.5. And then everything down here we pretty much leave at default. And then we'll go ahead and click OK. So this is that top part where we usually write in our name and our course and our homework number and due date and all that stuff. This is the very right side of the engineering paper. This is the bottom of the engineering paper. And then this is the left side where the hole punches usually are. So don't worry if the spacing is not enough, because this is mimicking engineering paper exactly. So this also includes enough space for hole punching. The next thing we need to do is we need to learn or figure out how to draw a line. So while I still have my grid template up here in the master page area selected, I'm going to draw my grid lines on this master spread. And I'm only going to do it on the right half of the spread, and I'm going to completely ignore the fact that there is a left half over here. So my focus is just on this right half. So before we get started, let's take a look at this bar over here on the left side, because we're going to use this a lot. The very top button is called the Select tool, and that's the mode that I'm in now. So if you notice, my cursor is in Select mode, meaning that I can click on things. The next tool that we're going to use a lot is the Line tool, so that's this one right here. The next tool that we'll use a lot is the Pan tool, the Zoom in, Zoom out tool, which is this tool right here. And then this thing down here, and this is actually 2 buttons. So right now this lower right one is indicating that if I double click on it right now, I'm going to set the color to the line itself. So if I draw a box, it's going to be the edge of the box. This other one, which is the Fill, so this top button, if I double click on this right now, it's set to no color. If I select a color for this, it's going to fill in the box. So think of this top left button as the kind of like the filling in the area. And this bottom one is kind of like the perimeter. So if I'm going to draw lines, I'm going to be concerned with, the line part of it. So I'll make sure that this stroke button is selected. And then I'm going to click on the Line tool. And now we're going to try to draw a line. So if you want to draw a completely straight line, you'll need to hold the Shift key while clicking and dragging. See, if I hold the Shift key, it'll do perfectly vertical or perfectly horizontal, and it will let you snap 45 degrees. But obviously in engineering paper, we don't have 45-degree lines. They're either perfectly vertical or perfectly horizontal. So all I need to do is draw a line, and I don't need to be too concerned if it is touching the edge or not, but I do need to make sure it's on the right side of my paper. So I'm just going to pan. And then I'm actually going to zoom in a little bit, so I'm just focusing on the right side of my paper. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set the color of my line. So if I click off of it, we can see what color it is right now. It's black. And if I click on it, I have it selected, and I have some handles here that allows me to make it bigger or smaller. But right now I'm not too concerned about that. I just want to make sure that I have the correct color paper. I just need to make a decision. Basically the correct color line. So to set the color, I'm going to go over here and double click on this button so that the color picker will open. And I recommend choosing colors that are between green, blue, and purple, and shy away from the warm colors such as reds, warm purples, oranges, and yellow. Yellow is typically used to highlight things, so you don't want that to be conflicting. So on mine, since I had already created it before making this tutorial, I chose kind of like a blue-greenish type of color. So for red, it was 168. For green, it was 224. And for blue, it was 249. So the closer the number is to 255, the lighter the color will be. The closer the number is to 0, the darker the color will be. So these are the color combinations you have to work with. There's basically red, green, and blue. So if I click off of that, we can see I choose kind of a aqua, marine, or a baby bluish type of color. So this is going to be basically the minor lines of my engineering paper. So from here I'll click OK. So now that I have one vertical line created, I need to create one more line, and it needs to be a horizontal line. So I'm going to click the line tool again, and I'm going to click and drag with my shift key pressed down. And it doesn't matter how long it is, because we're going to change that later. I just need to make sure that the color is set correctly. So I'm going back to my select tool here after I was in my line tool, and I'm going to double click on the color picker, and again I'm going to choose the exact same color. So I chose 68, 224, and 249. The other thing I want to make sure that I have is the correct line thickness. So we don't know how thick this line is. So to find out, we're going to go to the stroke button over here on the right side. And right now we can see the weight is set to 1. So through trial and error, I found that the best line weight is 0.5. It's not too thin and it's not too thick, and it comes close to what actual engineering paper is. And I don't need to do anything with these other settings, so I'll just click off. And you can see it makes that line a little bit more skinnier. And I'm going to do the same thing with this other line. I'm just selecting it with my select tool. And over here I'm going to change the weight to 0.5. And then I can basically close this out so I don't need it anymore. So the next thing I need to do now is create one more line. So I'll press Control C, which is the copy, and Control V to paste, which will give me 2 horizontal lines, and I'll need to do the same thing over here. Control C and Control V to paste. And what I'm going to do with both of these lines is I'm going to try to make it sit right on top of these margin lines, because that's basically going to be the edge. And I can tell you right now that InDesign is very concerned about precision and accuracy. So you're actually going to have to zoom in pretty close to get it. And that one looks pretty good. So I need to now do the bottom. So if you want to zoom out, press the Alt key, which will change the tool to the opposite version of the tool, which is zoom out. And then I'll zoom out. Then if you don't want to pan by clicking on this button, you can press the space bar, which will change the tool to pan. And then take yourself to the bottom of the line. So now I'm going to go back to the select tool and just make this line longer so that it touches the bottom. So this line is very important to make sure that you get accurate, and the one on the very far right side is going to be the same way, and so will be the top and the bottom lines. I just finished moving all of my lines on top of the margin lines. I'm going to zoom in really close here so that you can see what I did on the corners. So this is the horizontal line, and then this is the vertical line. So one of the lines I had the edge meet exactly with the perpendicular margin line, and then the one that wasn't meeting exactly, I made sure it came a little bit over and reached the edge of that other line. So I could have easily just stretched this one out this way as well and done that. It doesn't really matter as long as you have adequate coverage here. Because if you don't, and you just go to this edge here, you'll see a little box of white in the corner, and it's probably an effect that you don't want. So let me go ahead and zoom out, because the next thing that we need to do is actually make more lines. Now, for the next set of lines, which are basically the lines that go in between, we don't need to be concerned about getting them lined up and exactly spaced. The only thing that we need to do is make sure that we have the correct number of lines in between. So basically you can just grab this line here, select it, do a Control C and a Control V, and just paste it somewhere so that it just resides in between. See, it doesn't need to line up here, and the spacing in between doesn't need to be correct right now, because there is a tool that we can run that will make it all evenly distributed in between and make it all touch this top line up here. So like I said, the only two lines that are important that match up is this one and this right one over here. And then all the lines in between, it doesn't matter. We just need to make sure we have the correct number of lines in between. So I'm going to go ahead and replicate this line as many times as I can. So I've created basically 7 groups of lines here, because if you look at your engineering paper, you'll notice that you have a dark line every so often, like every 5th line, and you have 7 basically of those. So the very first one, I'm counting this very far left line as part of my 5 count here. This is my second 5 count, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and my 7th one over here, I have a count of 5, so I'm not including the very far right one. So the next thing I need to do is get these evenly spaced, because right now, you know, the spacing is kind of erratic, which is okay because we actually have a tool up here at the top which will allow us to evenly distribute these vertically. So the 2 tools that you'll be interested in is this one here and this one on top. So let's try the bottom one first, which should allow us to evenly distribute it horizontally. And then the next thing we need to do is make sure that all of these lines are going to be touching the top up here. So before I do that, let me make sure that things are correctly lined up. Sometimes, you know, while you're creating multiple lines, you can accidentally click on something and move it and then create basically extra work for yourself. I'm not going to care if the lines in between are spilling over, because that's going to fix itself. So that's really not a big deal. It's just the very last one and the very first one which are the most important lines. So basically we're going to use one of these line top or line bottom tools, and I'm going to align top, and the reason why is because what it's going to do is take all of these lines, find the max line, and line it up to the max line. So my 2 max line is the very left one and the very far right one. So I'm going to use this tool here. As soon as I click on that, it should align them perfectly. So right now we have our engineering grid lines that are our vertical ones. So I'm going to repeat procedure for the horizontal lines. And to do that, I'm going to select all of these vertical ones first and kind of move them out of the way. So I have them all selected. I'm going to right click and I'm going to choose group. That way they become one object instead of like several. And I'm just going to move it over here to the left side just so that it's out of my way. And it will allow me to work on the horizontal lines. So now all I'm going to do is copy and paste these horizontal lines many times, and I'm going to need a group of 10. So again, my first one is going to be a group of 4, because we're counting the very top line. And then from here on out, it will be a group of 5. So I just need to make one more. And I'm going to make 10 of these. And I'm obviously going to use my right edge to line them up later, so I don't care if it's spilling over on the left. So I'm going to make like 10 of these. Okay, I've made basically 10 groups of 5 here. So this is 1, this is 5. My second group of 5, third group of 5. So it's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then my top group, I chose my top one where it's going to count this edge as part of its 5. So the next thing I need to do is I'm going to zoom out so that I can select all of this using my select tool. I need to grab the bottom one as well. And I want it to be evenly spaced in between. So last time we used this bottom tool for the vertical lines, so we're going to use the one right on top for the horizontal lines to evenly space it. And then I also want it to line up along this right edge here. So take the max, which is the very top one and the very bottom one, and base all the lines in between on that. So that's going to be this tool right here, which should straighten it out. So there's our horizontal engineering paper lines. So now I'm going to grab my vertical ones and put them back on top. And I will need to zoom all the way in here to make sure that it's correctly lined up. Remember that InDesign is very concerned about precision and accuracy and giving the designer complete control, so we'll just need to make sure that things are lined back up again. So that looks good. Make sure there isn't anything weird in the upper right corner. Shouldn't be. So that looks good as well. So I'm going to go ahead and now zoom out again. And while I have my grouped horizontal lines selected, I'm going to go ahead and right click on it and choose ungroup, so they become individual lines again. And now the next thing I want to do is I need to create some major lines. So basically every fifth line is a little bit darker than the in-between lines. So I'm going to press and hold the shift key while selecting things. You're probably thinking, no, you probably mean the control key. And InDesign, it's always going to be the shift key and not the control key. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. One, two, three, 4, 5. Next fifth, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then our very far right one. So these are the lines that need to be a little bit darker. And to do that, I'm going to go to my color picker. And I'm going to try to make this line a little bit darker. So recall that the closer these numbers are to 0, the darker the lines become. So that's what I'm going to try to do, is try to make it a little bit more darker. I can also use the slider to see if I can get a darker effect. So I might go this way a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK to that. And then click off. And it looks a little bit darker. I might want it maybe slightly more darker. So I'm going to play with that a little bit more. Going back into the color picker, probably want it a little bit more darker. I'm going to drag this down here because I'm trying to stick with this kind of blue-greenish color. So that's a pretty decent darkness there. So let me click OK to that. Maybe a little bit more darker. And it comes a little bit close to what I want. And notice that our line is underneath these other lines. Don't worry about that too much. If it bugs you, we can definitely bring it forward. So let's go ahead and bring it forward. So I'll grab this one, every fifth one again. You can also group them together if you don't want to have to select them each time, which can be a pain. And then I'll right click on my selected stuff here and then go to Arrange, and I'm going to bring to the front and then click off. Zoom in again, and we should see that it should be sitting on top of our minor lines. Alright, so I'm going to repeat procedure now with my horizontal lines. So I just finished doing it to my vertical lines. Make sure you also do these edge ones too. Another thing that you can do is when you're coloring things and you don't want to have to go back in here to remember what color you used, you can click on this Add RGB Swatch thing, and when you do that, it will add in the swatches here your custom color that you created. So that could also save you some time. So I'm going to go ahead and now make a few other modifications. So recall down here at the bottom, engineering paper has usually a line that goes all the way to the bottom. Same thing over here all the way to the bottom. Then we have something similar here at the top. Another thing like that up here at the top. And then we usually have like two kind of like short lines here, which doesn't really line up with any of these grids, but it's the same color as these major lines. So what I might do is just copy and paste a major line and then make it short. That way, you know, the weight of the line and the color is all the same. And then I'll use the exact same tools that I did to get them evenly spaced. So basically I need to make sure that it's touching where it needs to be touching, which is here. And it looks like I need to take my horizontal lines and bring them to the front. I'll do that later. So this one looks right. So what I'll do is I'll grab this other one and just copy and paste it, and maybe put it right next to it just so that I can get an idea that it's lined up correctly. Looks good, so I'll click off of it and then zoom out. And then you can either manually place them across here, and I think I did that to a certain extent. So I think the first thing I did was I selected all of these, and then I tried to get it lined up horizontally. So it's like one of these tools, it's that one. And then I went back in here and I adjusted it based on the information that I needed to put in these cells. So I think one of mine is actually bigger. It's either the middle one or the far left one, and then one of them is small. It might be my name box. But you can adjust this any way that you want that works for you, as long as it's consistent. Like it's the same thing on all your engineering paper, then it's not going to be a very big deal, and nobody usually notices something like that. So it looks like our engineering paper is pretty close to being done here. I don't see any more things I need to do. I personally like to add a logo to my paper, since, you know, this is kind of like my own custom design. And if you're interested in doing that, how you do it is you go up here to File and you go to Place. And what you need to place is basically an image. So let me see if I can find one here somewhere. I usually keep my logos in here. And I'll use this one. And I'll just click and drag. And I usually line it up with this second box. If you're not sure where to place it, just go out to Amazon and do a Google, not a Google search, but an Amazon search for engineering paper, and you'll see different brands of engineering paper, and you'll notice that they usually put their branding right around here. And the reason why we choose a second set of boxes is because your hole needs to go here for when it goes into your binder. So I'm just going to go ahead and place this here, get it lined up and whatnot. And then the other thing I like to do, again, just another finishing touch sort of thing, is just add my name in here. So if you want to change the size of this box, so right now I'm just changing the extents of it. It's kind of like cropping. But if I want to make this bigger or smaller, I need to use this tool here. So once I have this tool selected, I can press and hold the Shift key so it'll change its scale proportionally. Just press on the Shift key and the left mouse button and drag, and it should scale it proportionally. You definitely want to use the Shift key, otherwise it'll make one side too long, the other side too short. The other thing you may notice is, wow, this looks horrible. It's very pixelated. It's actually really not. If you right click on it and you go to Display Performance and choose High Quality, it'll clear that up for you. So right now my logo is pretty small, so I'm going to try making it just a little bit bigger. I don't care if it prints and it gets cut off. It's not that big of a deal. Right now you notice the logo is very black and very bold, and it may be kind of visually distracting. That's something that we will fix later in a later step. If you want to add your name in here, I usually use this text tool. Click and drag again in here, and I usually type in engineering paper. And what I actually did is just went to Amazon and just copied some of the, the national brand formats. And then I put my initials in here. And then since this is kind of a circular shape where it's kind of centralized, I also make this central to make it all consistent and matching. You can change your font type by selecting all of this and then going up here and choosing whatever font you want. You get a preview. You can change the size using this one right here. Right now I just want it very small. And then if you want to make it bold or italic or whatever, this option exists. Not all fonts have this option. That's why I typically stick with Arial, because I get a full range of things that I can do with my font in Arial. So now that I'm done with the text, I can click off. I have a text box. I can drag it up here and use my arrow keys on my keyboard to line it up any way that I want. So I might scoot this over a little bit more So I'm just basically trying to line it up between the two boxes. So that looks pretty good to me. Might try to get this bottom edge to line up here. If you want it to line up perfectly, you can make kind of like an on-the-fly grid line. So up here in the ruler, you just click and drag, and a grid line will come down for you. And you can make things practically perfect doing that. And you can do another one up here. It looks pretty close. And then once you're done with the grid line, you just select it and then hit delete, and the line will go away. So that's pretty good right there. So now that I'm done making my engineering paper, I'm going to go ahead and just zoom out of this. And if you recall in our pages over here, this was nothing but a template. So we need to actually apply this to actual pages that we want to use. So down here in the actual pages area, I'm going to right click and choose insert pages. And I'm going to insert a 2-page document that's going to hop in after the page 1. And we really only have 1 page in here. And then as far as what master page, remember master pages are just templates in InDesign, what template I'm going to apply to the spread, I'm going to click this drop down and choose G Grid and then click OK. So now I'm in my actual page area, so this is actually what we'll export or print. And I have my template applied. So now that I'm in my actual pages area, I'm not in my template. Notice that I can click on, click and drag and do whatever, and I can't move any of my grid lines because the grid lines are actually in the template and not in the actual pages. So if I need to make a change to this because I don't like the way something is, I'll need to go back to my master pages area, double click on grid, which will change this view to back to the template grid, and then make the necessary changes I need to my grid line. So I'm going to go ahead and click back to my actual pages, and I notice that the page that has my engineering paper on is number 3. So that's the page that I'm going to actually export. So I'm going to go up here to File, and I'm going to choose Export, and I'm going to call this ENGG paper, and I need to find a place to save it. I am going to save it into my coursework folder in my template coursework that we created in an earlier step. And for now, I'm going to stick it into the practice folder as enggpaper.jpg and just click Save. In this window, we need to pay a little bit of attention here. So where it says export JPEG range, right now it's going to try to do page 1, and there's nothing on page 1. So recall there's nothing here. It's on page 3. So I need to change this to page 3. And then the resolution needs to be 300, because everything that we are going to do is going to be in this 300 DPI resolution. So make sure that this is set to 300. And then everything else here I leave at default, and I go ahead and click export, and it should save into that folder. So let's go and navigate to that folder and make sure that it has our JPEG. I'm just going to right click on it and find something to preview with it. It's relatively quick, like photos. And you can see our engineering paper. So the lines are pretty bold, so like I said, don't worry about that. Let me maximize this. Don't worry about the lines being too bright or your logo being too bright, because when we bring it into the next application, we're going to actually tweak this transparency, and all of this is going to be grayed back, so it's not going to be a big deal. So if you followed along up to this point, you probably realize that this step actually takes quite a long time to do. So if you're not interested in going through and creating all of these lines and following all of these procedures, which takes quite a while, I am definitely going to put out there the results. So I'll put this JPEG out there if you're interested in using it. And if you're not interested in purchasing InDesign, you're definitely going to want to grab the results from this, and that way you can completely skip the InDesign step. Because from here on out, we're not going to need InDesign anymore. I'm going to go ahead and close it and not use it again.